Before this story, I thought the biggest threat to my marriage was forgetting an anniversary or leaving dishes in the sink. I was wrong. The real threat turned out to be my wife Megan getting bored on a Friday evening and deciding our marriage needed a brand new rule. The problem was that we didn't even have old rules. By the time her little experiment was over, we were closer to divorce than either of us had ever been. To understand how we got there, I need to take you back to where it all started. Let me be clear about something up front. My marriage was good. Not perfect. Not a romantic comedy. Not the kind of thing you'd see on a greeting card. But genuinely, solidly, comfortably good. Megan and I had been together for several years. We rarely had serious fights, and most days we operated like two people who actually liked each other, which, I'm told, puts us ahead of at least half the married couples in America. We had our routines: Saturday morning coffee on the back porch, arguing about what to watch on TV every single night without ever actually agreeing, Megan stealing the blanket, me pretending I was fine with it, the usual stuff. If you asked me to rate our marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd have said a solid 8. Maybe an 8.5 if she'd just stopped rearranging my side of the bathroom cabinet. The one thing I describe as a recurring feature of our life together, not a flaw exactly, more of a seasonal condition, was Megan's ideas. Megan got ideas the way other people get colds, suddenly, without warning, and always at an inconvenient time. And the thing about Megan's ideas was that they were never small. She didn't wake up one morning and think, maybe I'll try a new shampoo. No. When Megan had an idea, it was always going to change everything. It was always the thing, the answer, the missing piece that was going to make their whole life finally run the way it was supposed to. I'll give you a few examples. There was the minimalism phase. That one started when she watched 3 YouTube videos about decluttering on a Sunday afternoon. By Tuesday evening, she had filled 4 garbage bags and was eyeing my stuff like a real estate developer looking at an empty lot. She nearly threw away my old gaming console, the one I'd had since college, the one I'd carried through 3 apartments, 2 cross-country moves, and 1 very contentious storage unit dispute. She held it up and said, "When did you last use this?" in the tone of a woman who had already decided the answer didn't matter. Then she went for the box of stuff I kept on the shelf in the closet. Old ticket stubs, a couple of photos, a pocket knife my dad gave me. Sentimental clutter, she called it. I actually had to stand in front of that box like I was protecting a historical landmark. And then she looked at my toolbox and said, and I quote, "You own a level jack. We've lived here for 4 years. Have you ever leveled anything?" I told her I leveled things all the time. She asked me to name one. I told her the conversation was over. The sugar thing came next. That experiment lasted exactly 5 days. I know because I kept a mental count the same way you count the days in a place you're not sure you're going to survive. Day 1, she was energized. Day 2, she was focused. Day 3, she was quiet in a way that made me nervous. Day 4, she told me she felt incredible, and that sugar was basically poison. Day 5, I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of a spoon hitting the bottom of an ice cream container in the kitchen. I walked out there, and she was sitting on the counter in her pajamas, eating cookies and cream straight from the tub. She looked at me. I looked at her. We both silently agreed that this conversation would never happen. Then there was the schedule phase. Then the couple's fitness challenge, which lasted about 2 weeks before we both pulled something and agreed that suffering together wasn't the same as bonding. Then there was the digital detox, during which Megan lasted roughly 18 hours before she needed to check something really quickly, and then spent 45 minutes scrolling. Here's what I learned from all of this. Every single one of Megan's experiments had a natural lifespan. Like a houseplant that hadn't been watered properly, they always wilted on their own if you just gave them enough time. The average was somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks. Some barely made it to 10 days. So over the years I had developed what I considered a very healthy strategy. I called it enthusiastic non-resistance. Basically, when Megan arrived with a new idea, I would listen, nod, Say something supportive, avoid direct confrontation, and then quietly wait for the whole thing to run its course. It worked almost every time. It was, honestly, one of my finest qualities as a husband. I was good at this. I had the patience of a man who had accepted his circumstances, a man of stillness, a man of zen. And then came the Friday night. I should have recognized the signs earlier. In my defense, I was tired. It had been a long week, I was on the couch with a beer, and the baseball game was in the 7th inning. Everything felt fine. But then I looked over at Megan. She was sitting on her end of the couch with her tablet propped on her knees, and she had that look on her face. That very specific expression that's somewhere between curiosity and absolute certainty. Eyes slightly narrowed, head tilted just a little. The look of a woman who had recently discovered something that was about to become my problem. I felt a small, familiar shift in my stomach. She wasn't watching something funny. She wasn't shopping. She was reading. And not casually. She was reading with intention, the way she read when she was building a case. I turned back to the game and told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. About 10 minutes later, she said, "Did you know that most couples who get divorced cite a breakdown of trust as the main factor?" I said, She said, "And a lot of it starts really small, like little things. Everyday stuff people don't even think about." I said, "That's interesting," which is what I say when I don't want to encourage a conversation but also don't want to be rude. She kept going. She talked about emotional intimacy, then about communication patterns, then about how most couples think they're being honest, but actually maintain all these little protective habits that slowly build walls between them. She had clearly been reading a very thorough article, possibly several. Specifically, she talked about honesty and how lying is the root of all problems in marriage. Now, while she was giving me what I can only describe as a 20-minute relationship seminar, I was doing something else in my head. I was running a quiet inventory of my recent activity. The car scratch. That one still made me a little nervous. I had been pulling out of the supermarket parking lot, misjudged the cart return distance, and put a long, thin scratch along Megan's passenger door. It wasn't deep. It wasn't terrible. But it was definitely there. For several days afterward, I had told her, very sincerely, that the scratch had probably been there for months and she just hadn't noticed. I had said it so many times I had almost started to believe it myself. Then there was the cheesecake incident. Her favorite. She had specifically mentioned it that morning. She had been looking forward to it. I had eaten it at 11 o'clock at night because I was hungry, and it was there and I lacked self-control. When she opened the fridge the next day and found it gone, I had stood next to her with exactly the right amount of surprise on my face. We had both looked at that empty shelf together, like two people staring at a crime scene neither of us had committed. And the trash. The number of times I had said I already took it out while actively in the process of sprinting to the curb before the truck arrived was higher than I'd like to admit. These were not crimes. These were acts of social maintenance. They were the small, gentle adjustments that kept daily life from becoming a series of unnecessary confrontations. They were, in my opinion, a gift. Megan did not see it that way. After the seminar portion of the evening concluded, she set her tablet down on the coffee table. She sat up a little straighter, and she got the expression she gets when she's about to say something she's already fully decided. "I think we should have a rule," she said. "A real one." I asked her what kind of rule, and I asked it very carefully, the way you might ask someone holding scissors what they're planning to do with them. She said, "No more lying. Not big lies, obviously. We don't do that. But no small ones either. No little cover stories. No convenient omissions. Complete honesty. All the time." I waited to see if there was more. There was more. "And," she said, "to make sure we're actually doing it, in 1 month we take a lie detector test." The baseball game was still on. I was aware of that fact in the way you're sometimes aware of background noise during a moment of crisis. Someone hit something. The crowd made noise. I wasn't really tracking it anymore. I looked at Megan. She looked back at me with the calm, clear eyes of a woman who believed she had just proposed a completely reasonable thing. I thought about the car scratch. I thought about the cheesecake. I thought about the trash. I thought about several other minor incidents that I had previously filed under handled and forgotten. No lying, I said. No lying, she confirmed. Starting when? Starting now. I picked up my beer. I took a slow sip. I set it back down. The thing that scared me most wasn't the rule itself. Rules I could work with. Rules had edges you could feel out, boundaries you could learn. The thing that scared me was the lie detector, because a rule without enforcement is just a suggestion. But a lie detector test in 30 days was a deadline, and I had never in my life been good with deadlines when the subject matter was things I had done. I looked at Megan, who was now smiling the satisfied smile of a person who had just fixed something. Every one of her previous experiments had been about the house, or food, or our phones. Stuff on the outside. Stuff you could wait out. This one was different. This one was about us. The first few days after Megan announced the new rule were, I have to admit, surprisingly quiet. Megan was glowing. And I mean that literally. She had the energy of someone who had just discovered a life hack that nobody else knew about yet. She kept saying things like, I feel so much more present, and this is exactly what we needed, and my personal favorite, I can already feel us getting closer, can't you? I smiled and said yes, which was, technically, a lie. What I actually felt was the specific anxiety of a man walking across a floor he knew had some loose boards, just not exactly where. Every conversation required a level of mental preparation I had previously reserved for things like tax season and difficult phone calls with my mother. Before the rule, most of Megan's questions answered themselves. Now I had to run every single sentence through a new internal filter, checking it for compliance before it left my mouth. It was exhausting, and it had only been 3 days. The dress situation happened on day 4. Megan came home from the mall with shopping bags, which was not unusual. She disappeared into the bedroom for a few minutes, which was also not unusual. Then she came out in a new dress and stood in the middle of the living room with the quiet confidence of someone waiting to receive a compliment they consider well-earned. I looked at the dress. The dress was not good. I want to be careful here because I am not a fashion person, and I fully accept that. But even I could tell this dress was doing her no favors. The color was somewhere between yellow and green, in a way that felt accidental. The cut was boxy in places it should not have been boxy. It looked like something designed for a woman who was not Megan, by someone who had only ever seen women described to them secondhand. In the old version of my life, the version I now thought of as the golden era, this moment had a very clear and well-established script. I would say something like, "That looks great on you," or "Nice, is that new?" And we would both move on and nobody would be harmed. Simple, efficient. A small act of domestic diplomacy that kept the household running smoothly. But we had a rule now. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because there was anything on the ceiling, just because sometimes you need a second to collect yourself. "So?" Megan said. "It's a nice dress," I said carefully. She tilted her head. "But?" I didn't say but. Your face said but. I took a breath. "I think that blue dress you have, the one you wore to your cousin's thing last spring, I like that one on you a lot more." Silence. The kind of silence that has texture. Megan looked at me for a long moment, then she looked down at the dress, then back at me. "Okay," she said, and she went back into the bedroom. Now here's the thing. She couldn't argue. She had invented this rule. She had spent 20 minutes explaining to me why honesty was the foundation of a healthy relationship. She had used the phrase emotional authenticity at least twice. She could not now be upset that I was being emotionally authentic about a dress. But she was in the quiet, controlled way that is somehow worse than being upset loudly. That evening she mentioned the dress 2 more times, not accusingly, just returning to it. Circling it like you circle a parking spot you're not sure about. Once she asked if I thought the color was really the problem, or if it was the cut. I told her honestly that I thought it might be both. She went to bed early. I sat on the couch and did the math. The dress had cost $60-something. The emotional cost of telling the truth about the dress appeared to be significantly higher. I was starting to think that the old system had been genuinely underappreciated. The dinner happened 4 days later. Megan had been on a cooking kick, which usually meant she had been watching videos again. This time it was something about clean eating and whole ingredients and meals that worked with your body instead of against it. I had learned not to ask too many questions during the research phase. She spent most of Sunday afternoon in the kitchen. I stayed out of the way, which is my standard policy whenever Megan is working on something she's excited about. I watched football. I minded my business. I was a model of non-interference. At dinner, she set a bowl in front of me. I looked at it. I will do my best to describe what I saw. It appeared to be grains of some kind, mixed with vegetables I didn't fully recognize, with a sauce that was the color of something you'd see in a nature documentary. It smelled mostly fine. It looked like something that had given up. I found this recipe from a nutritionist, Megan said, sitting down. It's supposed to be really good for gut health. I picked up my fork. She watched me take a bite. That specific watching that spouses do when they've cooked something new and they want a reaction, but they're also slightly terrified of the reaction. I chewed. I kept a neutral expression. I swallowed. Well, she said. In my previous life, 3 words. Really good, babe. Done. Plates cleared. Evening proceeds without incident. It's interesting, I said. She put her fork down. Interesting how? Just interesting. It's a lot of flavors. Are the flavors good? I paused for just a half second too long. Some of them are, I said. And there it was. The honest answer. Technically accurate. Diplomatically phrased. Completely useless as a social strategy. Which ones aren't? She asked. Megan. No, I want to know. This is the rule. I set my fork down and rubbed my face. The texture is a little hard to get past, and whatever that sauce is, it's tahini and miso. Yeah, that combination is doing a lot. She stared at me. I ate more of it, because I wanted to be supportive, and also because I was genuinely hungry, and there wasn't anything else on the table. She didn't finish hers. We did the dishes in the companionable silence of 2 people who had recently experienced something neither of them fully wanted to discuss. I should have seen the next one coming. That's on me. About a week into the experiment, we were on the couch one evening watching a show neither of us was fully paying attention to. It was the kind of night where you're both just existing in the same room, which is actually one of my favorite states of marriage. No agenda, no effort required, just 2 people being quietly present. Then Megan muted the television. That is never a good sign. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure, I said, because I still hadn't learned. Which of my friends do you like the most? I put my drink down very slowly. There are questions in a marriage that seem harmless and are not. This was one of them. There is no version of this question where the answer goes well. If you pick one friend, you are implying something about all the others. If you say you like them all equally, your wife will know you're being evasive. If you stall, your wife will assume the answer is scandalous. There is no exit. I am fairly certain this question is prohibited under the Geneva Convention, or it should be. That's a tough one, I said. Why is it tough? Because I like all your friends. But if you had to pick one, after a pause that I'm sure lasted longer than it should have, I said Sarah. Sarah was a safe answer. Sarah was funny and easy to talk to, and there was nothing complicated about my appreciation of Sarah as a person and a family friend. Megan nodded slowly. Why Sarah? She's easy to talk to. She's got a good sense of humor. More than me? That's not what I said. But you said you like her humor? I like your humor too. But you said hers first. I took a breath. Megan, you asked me to pick one. I picked one. This feels like a trap. She said it wasn't a trap. Then she asked which of her friends I would have dated if she and I had never met. I looked at her. She looked back at me with what I can only describe as calm, academic curiosity, as if this were a reasonable research question. "I genuinely don't think I should answer that," I said. "But the rule? The rule says no lying. It doesn't say I have to answer every question." She pointed out that refusing to answer was itself a form of avoidance, which was essentially dishonesty adjacent. I considered the possibility that I was talking to a lawyer in my wife's body. I answered, very carefully, in the most diplomatic terms I could assemble, that I had always thought her friend Laura seemed like a nice person. And I said it in the flattest, most clinical voice I could manage, the voice of a man describing a piece of furniture. Megan's eyes did a thing. She didn't yell. She didn't say anything particularly pointed, but there was a temperature shift in the room that I registered clearly. "That's fine," she said. "Good to know." She unmuted the TV. We watched the rest of the episode without speaking. I stared at the screen and thought about Laura, who I barely knew, who I had seen maybe 6 times in my life, and who had just inadvertently become a character in my marriage without doing a single thing to deserve it. Here is the thing about the first week of the honesty experiment that I don't think Megan fully thought through. All the uncomfortable questions were going one direction. She asked them, I answered them, I absorbed the consequences. She gathered data. It was like a lab experiment where one of the lab rats didn't know they were in a lab. By the end of the week, I had been asked about the dress, the dinner, the friends, and no fewer than 3 other questions I had navigated with the careful footwork of a man crossing a river on stepping stones in the dark, and I started to notice something. Honesty is a two-way street. That's what she had said. That was the whole premise. But so far, the traffic had been moving in exactly one direction. I turned this over for a couple of days. I wasn't angry about it. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't plotting anything. It was just a genuine observation. If honesty was good for the relationship, surely it was good in both directions. That was just logic. One evening, Megan settled in beside me on the couch, and I could tell by the slight tilt of her head that she was about to ask me something. I could see the question gathering behind her eyes, the way you can see a sneeze forming before it arrives. And I got there first. "Hey," I said, "since we're doing the honesty thing, can I ask you a few things?" She seemed briefly surprised. Then she smiled and said, "Of course." This was her experiment. She was delighted to participate. "Okay," I said. "Of all the gifts I've given you, which one did you like the least?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Be honest," I said. I said it gently. She thought about it for a long moment. Long enough that the answer was already clear before she said it. "The kitchen appliance thing," she said. "The one for the holidays?" I nodded. I had suspected that. I moved on. "What about vacations? Of all the trips we've taken, which one was the most boring for you?" She hesitated again. "Jack, I've liked all our trips." I waited. She looked at the ceiling in a way that was very familiar to me. "The lake cabin," she said finally. "I thought it would be more. There wasn't much to do." I had loved that trip. I kept that to myself. "Good to know," I said pleasantly. "One more. What's the habit of mine that bothers you the most?" She looked at me for a second. Then she said, "How long do you want me to take on this one?" "Just the top one," I said. She told me. "It was the way I leave cabinet doors open without noticing. Apparently I do this constantly, and it genuinely affects her quality of life in a way she had never fully articulated to me before." "I didn't know that," I said honestly. "Because I didn't." She looked at me with the expression of someone who was no longer entirely sure who had started this conversation or where it was going. "This is good though," I said. "Right? This is the whole point." "Yes," she said. A beat later she added, "This is good." But she didn't look like she thought it was good. She looked like someone who had opened a window to let in some fresh air and was now watching it rain into the living room. The experiment was continuing. The rule was still in place. The lie detector test was still on the calendar, like a very specific and deeply personal appointment I was not looking forward to keeping. And for the first time since Megan had announced her idea that Friday evening, I could see on her face a small flicker of doubt. Not enough to stop. Not yet. She was too committed to the premise, too invested in proving that this had been a good idea. But it was there, and I was paying close attention. Honestly, the experiment probably could have survived to the finish line. I know that sounds hard to believe given everything I've just told you, but hear me out. We were somewhere around the 3.5-week mark. The lie detector test was still on the calendar, looming out there like a dental appointment I'd been trying not to think about. But in terms of day-to-day life, Megan and I had found a kind of rhythm. A strange, exhausting, constantly vigilant rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. I had gotten better at honest answers that were also survivable. There's a real skill to it, it turns out. You lead with something true that isn't the most damaging true thing. You use tone as a cushion. You acknowledge the question before you answer it, which buys you about 2 extra seconds of processing time. It's not lying, it's just thoughtful delivery. I'd gotten pretty good at it. Megan, for her part, had quietly stopped asking me certain categories of questions. She still believed in the experiment. She still talked about it like it was working. But she had apparently decided, through no formal announcement, that some doors were better left with their knobs removed. So, we had adapted. Like people do. Was it the marriage she had envisioned when she launched this thing? Probably not. Was it the warm, deeply connected, emotionally transparent partnership described in whatever article she'd read on that Friday evening? I'm going to say no. But we were functional. We were talking. We weren't miserable. And then we invited people over. It was a casual thing. 2 couples we'd been friends with for years. The kind of friends where you don't clean the whole house beforehand, just the rooms they'll actually see. We ordered pizza, opened some drinks, and settled into the easy, wandering conversations that happen when adults who've known each other long enough finally run out of things to be impressed about. We talked about work, about a neighbor who had recently made some very questionable landscaping decisions, about whether buying a house in this market made any sense, or if everyone had just collectively agreed to pretend it did. Normal stuff. Comfortable stuff. I was relaxed for the first time in weeks. My guard was down. I was on my second drink and genuinely enjoying myself. That was my first mistake. Somewhere around the second hour, one of our friends, I'll call her Dana because she absolutely knows what she did, turned to Megan and asked how the honesty experiment was going. And Megan lit up. She had been waiting for this question. Maybe not consciously, but the speed at which she launched into her answer suggested it had been sitting near the surface for a while. She talked about trust, about authenticity, about how most couples think they're being honest but are actually moving through their lives on a kind of autopilot of comfortable half-truths. Everyone was nodding, leaning in, asking follow-up questions. I sat there with my pizza and smiled in the way you smile when you're the subject of a documentary being filmed in your own living room. Then Dana said, "We should play a game." I want to be precise about what I felt in that exact moment. It was the very specific dread of someone who recognizes a situation that is about to get much worse, but cannot identify a socially acceptable way to stop it. The game was simple. Each couple would write down a list of honest questions for another couple to answer. Real questions. The kind people normally skirt around. And everyone had to answer fully, without deflecting, without pivoting to something safer. "It'll be fun," Dana said. The word fun was doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in that sentence. Everyone else seemed genuinely enthusiastic. There was laughing and nudging and people already whispering to their partners about what to write down. I looked at Megan. She was smiling the smile of someone who had invented an honesty experiment and was now being invited to demonstrate it publicly in front of an audience. She couldn't say no. The whole brand of her last month was honesty. She looked back at me. I looked at her with the eyes of a man who very much wanted to go home, despite already being home. We both picked up our pens. People were writing their questions and laughing about them, which told me exactly nothing about how dangerous the questions actually were. People laugh at things that are funny and at things that are terrible. The overlap on that Venn diagram is enormous. I started writing something reasonably safe for the other couple and tried not to think too hard about what was being written about us. Then I noticed Megan. She had stopped writing. She was looking at the notepad next to her, the one belonging to one of the other guests, with the focused, involuntary attention of someone who just saw their own name on a document they weren't supposed to read. She glanced away, then back, then away again. Then she put her pen down entirely. The color in her face had shifted in a way I recognized. Not quite pale, just less enthusiastic than it had been 60 seconds ago. "I'm going to grab more drinks from the kitchen," she said. "Jack, can you help me?" The word drinks came out of her mouth at a very specific pitch. The pitch of a woman who does not actually need help with drinks, and both of us know it. "Sure," I said, and followed her out of the room. As soon as we cleared the kitchen doorway, Megan turned around and dropped her voice to a whisper with the urgency of someone defusing something. "I saw some of the questions," she said. "Okay. Jack." She looked at me. "They want to ask us about exes." I waited. "And about the most annoying things we do to each other." Still waiting. "And biggest regrets." She paused. "And past mistakes." I set my drink down on the counter. Past mistakes is a category with a wide radius. It could mean anything. It could mean nothing. It could also mean the kind of thing that, when answered honestly in front of two other married couples over pizza on a Saturday night, turns a friendly get-together into something you're still processing 6 months later. Megan was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face once during the entire honesty experiment. Not when I told her the truth about the dress. Not when I told her the truth about the dinner. Not even when the friend conversation went sideways. She looked genuinely unsettled. "We can't answer those honestly," she said. I let that sit in the air for a moment. And then, because I am only human, I said, "I'm sorry, didn't you say that honesty was the foundation of a healthy relationship?" She looked at me. "Didn't you say that little comfortable half-truths build walls between people?" She crossed her arms. "I believe you used the phrase emotional authenticity. Twice. Jack. I'm just quoting you back to you. I took notes." "I did not take notes, and this is different." "How is it different?" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the living room. "Because those questions are designed to cause problems. That's not honesty. That's just damage." I looked at her for a long moment. My wife. The woman who had spent nearly a month turning our household into a no-fly zone for comfortable fibs. Who had asked me about dresses and dinners and which of her friends I'd theoretically date in an alternate universe. Who had put a lie detector test on the calendar like it was a dentist cleaning. "So what do you want to do?" I asked. She looked me directly in the eye. "I want us to lie," she said, completely, thoroughly, with total commitment. "How committed?" "World class," she said. "Olympic level. I want us to answer every single one of those questions like two people who have absolutely nothing complicated in their past and find each other 100% delightful at all times." I picked my drink back up. "Megan," I said, "that is genuinely the most reasonable thing you've said in a month." She pointed at me. "Don't. I'm just saying, we are not having this conversation right now. We'll have it later. Right now, we have guests." We stood there for another second, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. Not defeat exactly. More like a temporary tactical retreat from a position she wasn't quite ready to formally abandon. "Drinks," she said, and started gathering glasses. "Drinks," I agreed. We went back into the living room and the game began. I will say this, Megan and I performed magnificently. We had been married long enough to function as a unit when the situation required it, and this situation required it. We answered every question with the smooth, unhurried confidence of two people who had never had a single complicated moment in their lives. Anywhere a truthful answer might have landed awkwardly, we found the version that was warm and vague and completely bulletproof. Where deflection was needed, we deflected with charm. Where charm wasn't enough, We redirected the energy of the room with a well-timed joke or a follow-up question aimed at someone else. It was, if I'm being honest, and I recognize the irony of saying that, some of our best teamwork in years. But here's the thing I started noticing about halfway through the game. We weren't the only ones doing it. The more I watched the other couples answer, the more I noticed the same tells I was probably showing. The slight pause before the answer that was technically responsive but somehow said nothing, the careful word choice, the smile that arrived just a half-second too late to be spontaneous. One of the husbands, a guy I'd known for years who I'll call Mike, got asked something about his wife's habits that clearly had a real answer behind it, and he delivered something so perfectly balanced, so elegantly non-committal, that his own wife looked at him sideways for just a second. The look of someone who knows their partner well enough to recognize when they're being competent rather than truthful. I watched this happen and felt something click into place. Nobody at this table was telling the whole truth. Not one person. We were all sitting in a circle of mutual, well-intentioned, socially necessary dishonesty, and every single one of us was more comfortable for it. The conversation was flowing. Nobody's feelings were getting wrecked. Friendships were intact. The pizza was still good. And this, I realized, was the experiment's final result, delivered not in our living room by the two of us, but in front of witnesses, with evidence. The guests left around 11. Megan and I stood at the door and waved them off, and then the door closed, and the house went quiet the way houses do after people leave. That specific stillness. We walked back to the living room. I dropped onto the couch. Megan sat down beside me. There were glasses on the coffee table and a pizza box that needed dealing with, and neither of us moved toward any of it. We just sat there. I don't know how long we stayed like that before one of us started laughing. I think it was me, but it might have been her. It doesn't really matter, because within about 4 seconds we were both laughing. The kind of laughing that comes out of exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "That was terrifying," Megan said. "That was the most stressful game night of my life," I said. "Did you see Mike's face when they asked him about—" "Yes. He was so obviously, completely—" We laughed again. Then it got quiet. Megan was looking at the coffee table with the expression of someone doing a calculation they hadn't quite finished yet. I knew that look. I let her work through it. "The thing is," she said finally, "we were right to not answer those questions honestly." "I know. That wasn't the place for it. Those weren't the right questions. And those answers would have just—" She trailed off. "Caused damage," I said. She looked at me. "I said that in the kitchen, didn't I?" "You did." She was quiet for another moment. "I'm not saying the experiment was wrong." I didn't say anything. "I'm saying," she continued, and I could tell she was being genuinely careful with this, "that maybe there's a difference between honesty and just saying everything out loud." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like something a reasonable person might conclude." She gave me a look. "Don't be smug." "I'm not being smug. Your face is being smug. My face is being supportive." She leaned back against the cushions and closed her eyes for a second. "The lie detector test is still on the calendar." "I know. We should probably talk about that." "Probably." Neither of us moved. Outside, a car pulled out of the driveway across the street. The refrigerator hummed. The pizza box sat on the table. We had 3 more days until the test. And for the first time in nearly a month, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. I woke up the morning after the party in a genuinely good mood. For the first time in nearly a month, I had gone to bed feeling like the experiment had finally taken a real hit. Not a fatal blow, maybe, but something had shifted the night before, and I could feel it. So, over breakfast, with the casual innocence of a man who is absolutely not being strategic, I reminded Megan of one small remaining detail. The lie detector test was still on the calendar. I was expecting at least a flicker of panic, maybe a long pause, maybe the beginning of a graceful retreat. Instead, she went quiet in a thinking way, not a defeated way. I watched her face, and I could almost see the stubbornness reassembling itself behind her eyes. The same stubbornness that had gotten us through a week of organic-only eating and nearly cleared out half our closets during the minimalism era. "No," she said. "If we started it, we finish it." She opened her laptop and started searching for lie detector services in our area. About 10 minutes in, she made a small, unhappy sound. 15 minutes in, she made another one. 20 minutes in, she looked like she had taken the search results as a personal offense. Finally, she closed the laptop. "Do you have any idea what this costs?" she said. I told her honestly that I did not. She told me the number. I put my coffee mug down carefully. Megan didn't look thrilled about it either. She stared at the closed laptop for a moment, and then she said slowly, "I mean, we can afford it. But if I'm being honest," and right there, on the phrase "if I'm being honest," I felt something wonderful beginning to happen. "If I'm being honest," she continued, "this is the dumbest way I could possibly spend money right now." I said nothing. I have learned over the years that sometimes the best thing you can do is stay completely still and let a moment finish arriving on its own. And then Megan started taking her own experiment apart. She did it piece by piece, in the quiet, slightly reluctant voice of someone reviewing a plan they had believed in and are now seeing clearly for the first time. She said the idea had looked good in theory. She acknowledged that most of the friction between us over the past month had been generated directly by the rule itself. She admitted that people keep certain things soft, not because they want to deceive each other, but because they want to protect what they have. And the party, she said, had shown her something she couldn't argue with. Nobody wants to live under constant interrogation. Not even the person who invented the interrogation. She looked at me. "It's over," she said. "The experiment is done." I told her I thought that was a wise decision. I said it without any smugness at all. Genuinely. I was proud of myself. The new rule joined the long, distinguished list of previous experiments. Minimalism, the sugar ban, the family schedule, the digital detox, the fitness challenge, all of them resting peacefully together in the graveyard of Megan's revolutionary ideas, which at this point had its own dedicated section of my memory. I was relieved, fully, completely relieved. And then an idea came to me. "I have a proposal," I said. Megan looked at me with immediate suspicion. After several years of marriage, she has developed an accurate early warning system for when I'm about to say something she won't immediately love. "What kind of proposal?" she said. "A new rule." She almost rolled her eyes all the way back. 1 hour, I said, of total lying, the most obvious, ridiculous nonsense we can think of. No points for creativity, just volume. She stared at me, then she laughed. Then, to her own apparent surprise, she said yes. What followed was probably the least productive 30 minutes in the history of our marriage, and also one of the best. I announced that I was, objectively, one of the most handsome men in America. Megan said that was actually an understatement and that I was being modest to a fault. She informed me that she had never in her life made an unnecessary purchase. I told her that her financial discipline should be studied at the graduate level. She declared that every single one of her experiments had been an unqualified success. I said I was planning to write a book about her genius and had already chosen a title. By the end, we were both laughing until our eyes were watering. I think it was because the conversation felt light again. Easy. Nothing to prove, nothing to survive, no questions being carefully evaluated before they left our mouths. Just two people talking nonsense to each other on a Sunday morning because they felt like it. When we finally settled down, Megan got a little quieter. She looked at me with the expression she gets when she's about to say something real. "I love you," she said. I told her I loved her too. "And I know you put up with a lot," she said. "My ideas, my phases, my constant need to fix things that don't necessarily need fixing." She paused. Most people would have pushed back a lot harder. I thought about that for a second. I pushed back, I said. You push back gently. That's still pushing back. She smiled. You always try to understand it first, even when it's ridiculous. I put my arm around her. Our marriage doesn't work because we have good rules, I said. It works because we end up on the same side eventually, even when one of us takes the long way around to get there. She leaned into me. Outside the window, the morning was doing its usual thing. Quiet neighborhood, someone mowing somewhere down the street, the coffee still warm. No rules, no experiments, no polygraph appointment. Just us, on the couch, which, if you ask me, was the whole point all along. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.